So recently I drew this piece for Mocha, and it was for an art trade. And I had drawn Mocha earlier this year. So this was drawn in September 2023. And I had drawn this one, I think around January of this year, so 2023. The design is essentially the same. This one, I'm pretty sure, is when the design was still a work in progress. So there's some differences. But this is the updated design. Very cute. I love it. I'd wanted to compare my improvement from January to September in a video format because I've never done it in a video format, and I just wanted to see how I rationalize things out loud. Because in my head, I'm pointing things out, but I've never said it out loud necessarily. I digress. I think the thing that stands out the most, right, in the difference between the two is the depth of the hair. You can tell that this hair is much more vibrant than this one, and it's not just because of like the really obvious and bright highlights that are like all over the place. It's kind of a lot to do with like the darkness, because this piece, for example, like, let's go to this like corner right here. And you see right here that there is like a couple layers of dark being built up. So we have like right here, for example, we have this, and then here as well, and then this darkness right here, see how it's like a different color than this one? Like this one's a little bit lighter. Like that adds enough variety for the eye to be like, oh yeah, I like that, right? Same thing here, it's cut sharp here, and then we have a light difference right here. So these two are different values, and that kind of creates more interest because it's still dark, right? Because this is the base color right here, and this is the first layer of dark, and then this is the second layer, right? And then just having that one extra layer really adds a lot, because when you go to the one from January, there's only one layer of shading, so it's more obvious here on like the hair, where it's just like on this back hair part, the pink one, and then here like that, you can see that it just doesn't get dark enough to where it's that visually interesting compared to the newer version. You can see kind of over here that there is a little bit more sense of depth, and that's because there's a couple of values kind of in the same pocket, even though it doesn't have that second layer of dark. Like here, there's not really the second layer of dark that I would put now, but because it's kind of triangulated where, okay, we have these three, this is dark, this is light, and then this was like kind of like, this is the base color, but it's darker than this one but lighter than this one. It creates visual interest right here in this like triangle in this little area, right? And that is kind of like, to me, I saw that like a warning shot, if you will, of where I was going in terms of my art, because I was kind of learning that I needed somehow to create more depth, especially in hair, because that's the part where people tend to like notice a lot. And I could tell that this work was kind of one where I was kind of learning where to kind of place it and how to place it, even if it's not particularly obvious in some places. But again, that one little corner, like this told me everything, right? It doesn't seem like much, but I can tell just like through the way I did it that I'm kind of getting there, right? To continue with the sense of depth, one thing that has helped a bit is not just creating the dark areas, like the deep dark areas, a couple layers, at least two I would suggest. It's also creating like really bright paths of light. So we have like these overlays that kind of just like mark around the edges. Even though it's not particularly like light source accurate, it is a choice because I think it looks good to highlight certain areas of the piece. Like it'll highlight this line that otherwise would be a little bit hidden because it's quite dark. This part helps it stand out a bit more, and it kind of gives us a better shape of what we're looking at. But not just those types of like more solid lines, but I found that using these like airbrushed line highlights, like right here, for example, it's pretty obvious on the dress. Like this was a single like stroke of a large airbrush on white, I believe. That was either on overlay mode for the layer, or it was screen, and that really helped create like light and variety in the tone without getting like super detailed. I think what also helps pretty well, going back to having layers of dark, is that sometimes I tend to struggle with finding a balance between like how solid one of the dark layers should be in comparison to like the lightest. Like for example, like here there's two shades, one, two. They're pretty similar, but they're cut off in a way that's like a little bit blended, so you can't necessarily see it. Like the edge isn't necessarily very hard, but I think in some areas, like for example here, like there's a very hard edge, as well as like here and here, and then like here, these are very hard edges. But sometimes I want to have like some sort of a depth that is much more subtle. That's kind of what happened here, where I'm pretty sure here I use like a gradient on multiply, so like an airbrush to have it go from darkest to lightest, and then I just erase going this way some parts to make it softer, so that it's still quite dark here, but it's not super harsh like right here. So it looks like I just like did a line right there, right? One thing also I've struggled with in the past is like it goes hand in hand with like the whole like there's not enough depth and things or visual interest, and I found adding like a little bit of a sort of like cross hatching or like some sort of a texture. Really, I know some people use usually like a grain texture that's really subtle, but it works really well. But for my own eyes, I find it really hard to distinguish the visual interest caused by a really light grain filter, mainly because I've been working on the piece for so long that my eyes are kind of like blended in already, and so the grain looked as if I didn't add anything there. But I'm sure if someone else was looking at it, they would be like, oh yeah, I can see it, or like I can sense it. But as the artist, I kind of have trouble sensing it. So what I like to do is do a more obvious but not super distracting like cross hatching part on the hair in particular, because again, the hair is usually a really important focal point in a lot of characters. And I have it on usually on the dress too, like on certain parts of the clothing, just parts where I feel like they look really uninteresting or plain, or I feel like they could have like a little bit more of a focus. I just put them there. Sometimes it'll be the base color of the hair on a multiply layer, and it's the opacity is down quite a bit, so that when you zoom in you can kind of see it, but when you kind of zoom out, it's not super obvious, but you know that there's like you can sense the variety in shapes, textures, etc, etc. Also, as someone who doesn't do backgrounds very often, I found that adding a little like dark blur, what would you call it, like a shadow like this, creates a interesting start for a background in a place where there really isn't any, since I just like to focus on the drawing of the character and not like a very complex background. So for this one, January, you can see that there is no gradient, and while it does have like the hearts, like the cute like graphic elements in the back to create that interest in the background, it's really not doing a good job of creating enough of a interesting separation between the figure and the backdrop. There's a light white outline to at least cause separation between these two parts that meet, but overall it's just not as visually interesting as this one from September, where the shadow creates like enough visual interaction with the background. So we can see like this color is like a very light lilac, but we see that the shadow of the character, accurate or not, it really doesn't matter, is overlapping and interacting with the background in a way that makes like, now we have 1, 2, 3 different visual things, as opposed to just like the 1 and the 2, which would have been the outline 1, 2, because this kind of is like the 3, but it's just not that much different. Does this make sense? I don't know. This is something I've really been into lately. I might do an own video on this, but what I found recently for eyes is that doing a light airbrush up here really creates a ton of visual interest in an eye. So like, to do it really briefly, it's like you have like the eye shape, here's like the eyebrow, you fill it in with a color, let's say like this blue, and then let's do like a light blue for like this, right? So we have like a very basic eye. The one thing that I found really helps create a lot of visual interest is that you find kind of a similar color. I recommend a complementary color, so that would be like a color like in like on the color wheel in this little section. It would be a color like right across from it, or an, I think it's called analogous color, a color next to it. I recommend those two. But doing I use a clipping layer, a light airbrush of that color, maybe like lower it a little bit, creates a lot of visual interest. So let's turn it into like the other color. See, it looks so much better. So much better. It's a big tip, big fan. I believe okay. I believe that's about it for what I have to say about this piece. Generally speaking, there are probably a lot of other things I could go into, but those are the things that stood out to me the most. Yeah, I hope that was somewhat interesting and or informative. To me, it was. I think it's important to kind of express things that you notice or change, kind of reflect on your own work. Even if it's not all the time, or if it's a little bit more passive, I think it really does help. Because I don't think I would have been able to get such nice improvement in about half a year, or a little bit over half a year, if I wasn't looking and noticing little things that I could change, or things that I preferred, or things that I liked from other works that kind of were inspiring. I think noticing and like reflecting are really important when it comes to improving your work, especially if you want to do it in a short amount of time. It's not necessarily not important. It's not necessarily necessary to improve in a short amount of time. I think you can get a lot more satisfaction if you improve slowly. But if that's something you are looking at as a goal to improve really short amount of time, then I do think being super perceptive and observant in your own work and the works that you like to look at, kind of comparing the two and trying to mesh the two, I think that really does help speed up the process of improving your work. So yeah. If you guys enjoyed this type of video, let me know. I am more than happy to go over other works, maybe redrawing old works and then comparing them to their new versions. I'm very, very happy and willing to do so. I hope you guys are doing your best out there. It doesn't have to be drawing, but I hope you guys are doing your best.